signal that we have movie spotlight as we head into the weekend. We're going to preview 2 films for you as always. And also, as always, joining us here in the studio, Jason Bechervaise and Darcy Paquet. Gentlemen, hello to you guys.
Hi, happy Friday.
Yeah, hello.
Indeed. I don't know how excited you guys are. This is a big foreign film release, New Zealand-US co-production produced by Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame. Mortal Engines. This is a futuristic blockbuster. Darcy, is this going to be a little bit complicated to explain as far as the premise goes?
Yeah, I mean, this is based on the first novel in this 4-book series that was published by Philip Reeve in 2001. It's set, first of all, 1700 years in the future. But it's very much kind of an analog future rather than, a digital future or the kind of very
is it dystopian?
Shiny neon future. Yes.
It is.
And so naturally the world was destroyed. Civilization has had to more or less start over again. And so things are run by steam power rather than electricity. But they have been able to do this on a huge scale. To the extent that entire cities have become mounted on these giant tracks and wheels that make it possible for them to travel great distances. Resources are pretty scarce too, and so the way this works is that cities survive by consuming smaller cities, dismantling them for useful parts, kind of assimilating the population into its own. And they illustrate this in the opening sequence, which is probably the most interesting part of the film. You see this small city kind of minding its own business on this plane, and then all of a sudden on the horizon, London appears. And
it's like a monster truck.
Yeah. And it barrels its way towards the city, and everybody panics and they pack up and they start racing across the plane. But London is faster, and eventually they harpoon the smaller city and then kind of pull it into its giant maw. So that's kind of the way the dynamics.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty interesting, I think. Jason, would you, what are your thoughts on sort of the lead characters? Maybe give us a bit of an intro.
Yeah, sure. There are 3 leading characters. One of the main protagonists is this young, very determined, quite intense woman, played by the Icelandic actress Hira Hilma. She's when we first kind of see her at the beginning of the film, she has her face covered. We just see her eyes, but she's clearly got an objective. She's kind of hiding a knife, and she's trying to kill one of the kind of highest ranking figures in this city of London, played by Hugo Weaving. Who's been in a number of films, including The Matrix. He's widely admired. He's a very clever man, but it becomes soon evident that he has a dark streak, and he comes across as a very I guess has a nice character. He's got a daughter and she respects him enormously, but clearly he's got other objectives. And then we have this very kind of nonchalant guy played by Robert Sheehan, who works in the London Museum looking after kind of ancient artifacts like cracked mobile phones. It's not surprising, really, that these 2 younger figures become romantically attached.
We mentioned in the beginning how this has Peter Jackson's name attached to the film. Rightly or wrongly, he's always synonymous with the J.R. Tolkien books and the fantasy genre. But to what extent is he personally involved in this work?
I mean, really quite involved. He was the one who read the novel back, I think, in 2007 or so, and then just decided that he had to make this into a film. I think that most people, when they read the novel, thought, this is impossible to make into a film. But, Peter Jackson is someone who is very ambitious visually and willing to take on really difficult projects. And originally he was going to direct it. The thing is, as he was preparing this film, suddenly it became possible for him to shoot The Hobbit. The Hobbit had some rights issues, and then suddenly they got cleared up. And so he changed plans and he dived into The Hobbit and made those 3 films. And so now finally he's coming back to it. And because he has a lot of other projects kind of on his plate, and also because he has this longtime assistant named Kristen Rivers, who, has been kind of, directing some of the more difficult scenes in The Hobbit, for example, and, has been working together with Peter Jackson for many years. So he decided to give his assistant the chance to direct his first feature with this film.
Well, bottom line then, I think we're getting a little sense that whether we're talking Oscars or not here, Jason, yay or nay, what do you think about this movie?
It's not terrible, but for me it's just all too familiar. You've got the emphasis on spectacle, as you'd expect with Peter Jackson. So visually it looks... some reviewers have said it looks spectacular, which it does, but I think a lot of people would also agree that we've seen so many of these films, and it's difficult now to go and watch a film where it does have impressive special effects, but to come out going, wow, it looks incredible, because we've just seen this all before. And then this whole dystopian backdrop, this is all very familiar, of course. We've seen it in films such as Elysium, Hunger Games, and so on and so forth. And so it's just the same old story dealing with kind of social struggles, but just packaged slightly differently. We have these like city trucks. It's just the same old kind of stories, but with some variations.
So we were talking, Darcy, before we got on air, that interestingly, this is going to be released here in Korea before in the States. That could be indicative of the attractiveness of the Korean market, also the fact that maybe there's not as much hype in the U.S. How well received do you think this will be by the audiences?
I don't expect it to be a huge hit. Certainly it's opening at a busy time, in the kind of winter box office season. And in general, it's not a great film, to be honest. I wonder if, sometimes when you have these films that are really spectacular, that have a very complex backdrop, that you get too focused on kind of the look of the film and the visuals and the setting and not enough on the characters and the basic drama. And, I haven't read the book, so I can't say how dramatic the human story is in the book. But in this film, the human story is... not too interesting.
Okay, so it's kind of a meh, I think.
It's not going to get very good word of mouth, I think.
Let's quickly get to the Korean film local release, a new thriller starring Kong Hyo-jin based on a Spanish film called Sleep Tight, released in 2011. Jason, start us off, please.
Yeah, this is really fascinating film. It's a new film from the immensely talented filmmaker Lee Kwon. He made a movie called My Ordinary Love Story, which I think is underrated. It's a really, really good film. Now, this movie gets the basic, his new film gets the basic premise from the Spanish film Sleep Tight, like you said, Henry. That was released 2011. The remake follows Kyung-min, played by Kang Yoo-jin, who works for a bank, and she lives alone in this like studio apartment or office style, although the film initially suggests otherwise. And this is where it gets a little bit creepy, because a man appears to be living with her. Now, the way it's introduced, you kind of assume that it's like this young couple, but that's not the case. She's unaware that there's this man in her apartment, but she does figure out that someone is trying to get into her apartment, so she changes the door code, calls the police, and before long, a body turns up in her apartment, and she's questioned, and the body count rises, and the film takes a rather dark turn. And we also have Kim Ye-won, who plays the main character's trusted friend and co-worker, while Kim Sung-ho plays a detective, and the superb Jo Bok-rae is the film's kind of stalker. The original film, the main character, in the Spanish film, the main character is the disturbed man. But in this film, it focuses on the female protagonist, played by the wonderful Kong Yoo-jin.
The term you used, creepy, it really does sound like a creepy film. Would you say it's kind of a horror flick, Darcy? Is it pretty scary? It is scary, although, to me, what it feels like is kind of midway between thriller and horror. So it is very scary. It's a little different from a full-on horror film.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's something that you can connect with because it's in a very ordinary kind of setting. You know, there are no supernatural elements to this. And, you know, Kong Yo-jin is such a good actress that she really pulls you into the story and kind of gives the film that extra dimension. But I have to give a lot of credit to the director too, because, you know, there are a lot of thrillers that are made about kind of similar types of setups, or, you know, the idea that somebody is stalking you or watching you, and you know, you're kind of powerless to in this sort of situation is common, but he makes it feel kind of new and very very vivid and frightening. Right. So yeah, I do highly recommend the film.
In terms of trends, Jason, there's been a number of mid-budget hits, Little Forest on Your Wedding Day, Intimate Strangers, just to name a few. Some of the big blockbusters or the big budget films have actually been flops. How would you say this film then fits into the trend?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting year. I know Along with the Gods or Shim과 함께 was a huge hit, but I think that film is certainly distinctive. There have been a lot of disappointments this year in terms of the kind of big high-budget films such as In Lang. And what we're seeing is these kind of mid-range budget films performing very, very well. Intimate Strangers, On Your Wedding Day, Little Forest. And this film was made on a modest budget as well, very well orchestrated. And I think audiences, particularly kind of younger viewers, and that's been highlighted this week, when one of the CEOs of Korea's leading multiplex chain, he talked about this kind of 20s generation kind of leading the kind of changes in the industry in terms of viewership. And I think what they're after are films that are different and not the kind of formulaic blockbusters that we often see. And I think what's also happening with the changes in the industry because of the working regulations that they're stipulating that the hours need to be capped at a certain amount, and so budgets as a result are increasing. So for a film that is very expensive, the budget can increase by $1 to $2 million, which is a huge amount. So the studios are now having to think about what films they produce and the budgets, of course. And these films, these kind of mid-range budget films, doing very well. And I think Dorlock has a good chance of kind of following that trend. We may see kind of more of these films in the future.
Right.
I think that's a welcome trend for sure.
You guys both seem to like this quite a bit. Darcy, will it make its money back? You think it's going to be pretty successful?
Well, it opened at #1, which is a nice start. And it basically is 2 weeks, because in 2 weeks we've got some huge films arriving at the box office that are going to clear everything in its path. But I do think that, you know, this is the kind of film that people are going to talk about, and they're going to come out of the theater and tell their friends to see it. So I think that in that 2 weeks, because it is a lower budget film, I think it has a good chance of kind of making some money.
All right, great. Well, a nice little window here for a film like this. Just before we say goodbye, Jason, I mean, you guys both alluded to it, but we're now starting to head, even with this segment, into some of the kind of crazy releases that are going to be sort of buzzed about for the rest of the year, right?
Yeah, there's Drug King, Swim Kids, we've got Aquaman. But yeah, do go and see Dorlock before it disappears in a couple of weeks. You'll be looking underneath your bed to make sure no one's there. And my wife and son are in the UK at the moment, and so I'm living by myself. And so I looked under the bed to make sure no one was there.
Good advice as always, Jason, along with the great analysis. Darcy as well, thank you very much. Hope you guys both have a good weekend.
Thanks, you too.
You too.